I've said to my team, I don't care how you're doing it. As long as you're working in 3D, that's where we need to be.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Around Design. Today we have Jared Goldman. Welcome, Jared.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thank you. And so I'll let Jared introduce himself, just give us a quick kind of introduction of who you are and what is it that you're doing in the industry.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. So I am the Vice President of Design at New Balance. And so my responsibilities are on the performance side of footwear, the design of all the products that we create. I also am responsible for 3D visualization at New Balance. So that's been from a 7-year journey of trying to get into 3D, trying to get more designers working in 3D. Prior to New Balance, I spent about 5 years at Under Armour, helped them start their footwear division. So that was really interesting, just to go into an apparel company and help them start their footwear. So designed their first line of football and baseball cleats, then brought in a team and went into sandals and basketball and all these different categories. So it was a fun 5 years. And then prior to that, I started my career at Reebok, designing football, baseball, basketball, all different categories of product. So
Wow.
that's
So
me.
that's you. Well, I would like to go a little bit even further back. Like how do you become you? I mean, obviously you've taken us through your professional career, but how do you ended up being a designer? How do you ended up being in this kind of route to where you are?
Yeah, it definitely was not planned. I'll say that. Like I never grew up and said I want to be the vice president of design. That just kind of happened. But I would say, as a kid, I was always into things, tinkering, using my hands, that sort of thing. I used to like to take things apart. And then I also have a family that has a creative background. My mom and sister had their own interior design firm. So they design restaurants and hotels and that sort of thing. So I was definitely exposed to that at a young age. My grandfather had his own glass business, but he built his own house up in Vermont. He refurbished an old car. So I feel like I was always around creativity. And then, as I went to school, I thought about architecture, but that felt a little bit limiting. And I found industrial design, which I felt like was kind of problem solving, product design, that sort of thing. So I went to Syracuse for product design and was the right choice, I guess.
When you started design, like industrial design, do you always have this kind of inclination for sportswear, or was that just after you graduated, suddenly it happened kind of thing?
Yeah, no, that really wasn't. I didn't know. I didn't think about. I'm going to go into industrial design, and I'm a sneakerhead. I want to do that. I wasn't really. Again, I thought about product design, problem solving, that sort of thing. I got lucky. I feel like when I was at Syracuse, Reebok had a competition called Design Innovation, and in your last year of school, you submitted a project to Reebok. So you designed something that you thought Reebok could make. So I submitted a project, and they selected 3 people to come in and intern based on those projects. So I was one of those 3 that got an opportunity to go in and intern for a summer, and I got hired from there, and I was in the footwear industry. But it wasn't something that I had thought about, like I want to go do this. I just kind of fell into it. I played football and baseball in high school, always very athletic. So the mix of design and sports just made sense.
And so, going out of university as an industrial designer and then going into the sportswear industry, where things tend to be a bit different in terms of the process that you're taught to follow at school, and then the process that happens when you're actually working. So what was that like? How do you feel? You had all these skills, and then suddenly you end up kind of like going into this place where you need to be communicating with people that are not necessarily only designers, and the process is probably a very rigid process. How was that for you as an intern?
Yeah, very different for sure. I think you got all the fundamentals that you needed when you were in school, but you didn't know how to kind of put those together. And I still remember like the first concept drawing I brought into my boss. I have it here, and I look back at it, I just laugh at it because it's like he probably laughed at me and was like, "What is this person doing here?" But you realize how much work goes into creating something, and you're sitting around all these super talented designers, and you just can learn so much from each of them. So, again, I felt like I had the basic skills, and then there's something else that I think that's helped me throughout my career is that I feel like I have the creative skills to be a designer. I've designed for a number of years, but I also have like the business side of skills. I can put a spreadsheet together. I feel like I can manage a team. I can do all those other things. And not every designer is able to do that. And for a lot of designers, you're taking somebody who's super talented and taking them away from what they're really good at. But I feel like I had this ability to balance both things. And I don't know if that's something that I learned over years of working with people, or it's just something that I naturally had. But it definitely is something that helped me in being able to like understand what was going on at a young age, because you're being challenged by all those other designers. It's like competition, right? I want my shoe to be the one that's selected and put into the market, and you're sitting there with 50 other crazy talented designers that are trying to do the same thing.
And you having that kind of like double way of looking at things. It's not just design, but it's like that business sense that could actually help you kind of like get your design advanced in a certain way.
Yeah, as a designer, you can't just draw a pretty picture, right? You have to understand the costing side of it. You need to hit your timelines. You need to understand materials. So when I was a young designer, I wanted to learn all those different aspects so that when somebody came back to me and said, "You can't build that way," I knew just as much as the developer to say, "Yes, I can. We just need to stitch it this way and turn it around." Or if the costing person said, "You can't do that. It cost $2 to make that part." I had enough knowledge to go back and say, "Well, why is it costing us $2? If we did it this way, it'll cost us $1." And then you're able to execute your design because you're able to challenge people based on your knowledge. So like I always think that was a big thing, is just learning all the aspects around you so that you can do your job better.
Yeah, and this is kind of like a really important piece of what a designer should actually be doing, right? Like as designers, our entire career obviously is being creative and solving problems and like just proposing something, but at the end of the day is how do you communicate how like those ideas, and how do you extract knowledge and value from everybody else that needs to be involved in the design process so that your ideas can actually get to the market as opposed to just being really cool concepts, right? And so
Yeah, and
I'm,
it's yeah.
I'm curious to hear like how have you, I mean, obviously throughout your career, but now in the position where you are at, how are you helping your team kind of like explore more those areas? And as you said, not be designers that create kind of like pretty pictures, but rather have a very multidisciplinary way of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that you have to challenge design with, and it's hard sometimes to teach people to think that way. But you have to, if you want to be successful, right? You have to kind of round up all the people on your team so that you can push your concept forward. Not everybody's going to like what you design. Not everybody's going to want to help you make it. So the more collaborative you are, the more successful you're going to be. And I always found that I would bring people in, right? So bring your developer in, bring your marketing person in, get their opinion, get them bought into the project early on. right? So if they feel vested in the project, they're going to help you push it forward. If you just bring something on them, at a design review in front of 30 people, they might not like it, they might not be on board, but if you do it more kind of one-on-one with people, I think you can get them on board and get them excited about your project. So, we push people to make sure that they're meeting with their counterparts early in the process, so that then again, when it gets in front of a leadership, a team, that sort of thing, it's not one person coming forward, it's a group saying, hey, this is what we think is right for the project. So it's so much about collaboration and just working with people and bringing them into that process.
And how are you doing that? Because, like you mentioned, bringing all of these different stakeholders and people that need to have an opinion. But in most cases, these people end up kind of like speaking a different language, right? Like they maybe communicate in a different way. They might not sketch. They might not kind of like even understand like properly a sketch, because maybe, the views are not necessarily like expressing the design fully and so on. How do you, like, what are the things that you have implemented so far that allow your team to actually like kind of like communicate the ideas better?
Yeah, I think you pointed me right at 3D for this question. But
As I was asking the question, I was like, I don't want to point him in that direction necessarily, but
yeah, well, I mean, as a designer, the better you can express your idea so that somebody who's a non-designer can understand it, the more successful you're going to be. So, when you do a orthographic Illustrator drawings, those are great. But again, somebody has to interpret what that looks like as it comes around the product. If I'm able to show you in 3D, rotate a product around with accurate materials and colors, put it into a scene, put it on an athlete, you're really like taking all the guesswork away. So it's so much easier for somebody else to say, I love that. Or, if somebody, we've had the funny ones are, well, when I see what it really looks like, I can make a decision. And we're like, come on, that's what it's going to look like. So, and that's the thing. People are hesitant to make decisions. So if we can give them these tools so they can make the decision so that you can continue moving on in the process, that's what we're trying to do. One of our challenges right now is that we're able to create these really amazing 3D assets, but we can't actually manufacture them. So there's a balance where our 3D model looks so good, and then the sample comes back and doesn't look as good. And it's how do we get those two things to meet in the middle? So, we're trying to get factories on board now looking at a 3D asset and giving us feedback and saying, this part's not manufacturable, or, because we don't do that right now. And that's kind of that next step.
so your team is working in 3D, but then you still need to be creating those 2D tech packs and just sending them over and communicating in the old way, let's say.
Yeah, we're like in that in-between world right now where we have some designers that are using their 3D asset as their tech pack. We have other designers who are taking a 3D drawing, kind of flattening it, and then building a tech pack. We still haven't totally figured out how do you have like a live 3D asset that is your tech pack, and then there's some sort of build of materials that goes along with it. Back, so the file almost can go back and forth with a factory. So I think everybody's still trying to figure that out, and people are working so many different ways. We have people working in Gravity Sketch, people working in Modo. There's a lot of different formats. With 2D, I feel like almost everybody was working in Illustrator, and it was kind of the language. With 3D, you have so many different ways people are creating, and I've said to my team, I don't care how you're doing it, as long as you're working in 3D. That's where we need to be.
So let's take a few steps back, because probably some of the people that are listening might not like know about the work that you have been doing for the past 7 years, which is quite impressive, because it's kind of like the first company in the entire industry that is kind of like moving in that direction and has been moving for that amount of time. So it would be great to hear a little bit about what is that strategy that you actually started, and what was kind of like the genesis of it? What was your vision when you started? Because probably it's morphed and transformed, and now it's something very, very different. But what were you thinking when you started thinking about bringing 3D into the workflow?
Yeah, I almost would step back and think about when I started my career. I always looked at technology could help me do my job better, right? There were other designers that I sat next to that had all their different like weighted pens, and they could draw by hand meticulously. It looked like a photo. And I didn't have that ability. I could design, I could render something, but I wasn't like at that level. So I knew if I could use Illustrator and Photoshop, I could compete with those people. So I kind of soaked in as much as I could in terms of technology to be able to do my job better. And then kind of throughout my career, I've always been looking at how to incorporate 3D. We did SolidWorks training at one of my companies. We did like Rhino. We always trying things, and nothing ever really caught until we started playing with Modo, and it was more design friendly, and it seemed to be something that the industry was using. So, that kind of that sparked it. But again, when we started with at New Balance, it was I want designers to start concept drawing in 3D versus 2D. It was that simple. We weren't really thinking beyond that. But over the last 7 years, we've built a whole 3D team. We have, I think, 12 people across our footwear and apparel 3D visualization team in-house. We have probably another 25 in our factories in Asia that are not New Balance employees. They are actually factory employees that are building 3D assets for us. And then we have all the designers now that are training in Gravity Sketch and in Modo and, creating content every day. And, I think what's changed along the way, where I thought it was just a design tool, it's really become a visualization tool across the company. So we use 3D assets at our line reviews. During COVID, we sold product in to our customers using 3D assets because we didn't have samples. We've used it on our website. We've used it in some social media. So those 3D assets that now starts with a designer can be used so many different ways. So it's really expanded how we thought we were going to use it. And then, one of the biggest things is the cost and the time to make a product, right? So if we can cut down on how many samples we make, we don't have to ship as many samples. And if we can do it quicker, we can get product to market quicker. So it's really, I think we're at this tipping point where it's going to really change the industry going forward, because a lot of people in the past were hesitant to adopt 3D. It was difficult. Designers didn't want to necessarily learn how to use it. But I think we're getting to the point where within footwear that everybody sees the value of it. I do feel like other industries are further ahead than footwear. But from all the different companies, I'm hearing them that they either have teams in place or they're training designers to use 3D software because it's just where we're going. You have to be able to use it.
I really like how you said that you started by thinking that you by wanting to have the designers creating concept sketches in 3D, which is kind of like it's a weird concept to think about like that, because in reality 3D has always been a bit more technical, kind of like the later stages. So what gave you that idea? Like, it's usually something that people don't think about.
Yeah, again, it was just you're working with non-designers, and how can you give them a glimpse to what the product's going to look like before we go make anything? Within footwear, we're doing rounds and rounds and rounds of sampling to try to get that piece to look the way we want it. And the teams in Asia, different language, right? So they're looking at a flat picture and they have to interpret what they think it's going to look like. If we can give them a 3D asset and they can spin it around and they can look exactly at what everything looks like, the first time we get back an actual sample, it should look a lot closer to what we want. Like there's nobody guessing, I think he wanted this to do that, right? It's just there. So yeah, so I mean, I think that value of concept sketching is so important because it's the designer who's creating. We want them to be able to create and share their idea. It's easy for we also I would say it's easy for a designer to sit with a 3D artist and have the 3D artist create it, but you have two people working on a project instead of just one. And I think I talked about this at the conference. We want the designers creating the concept model. So it's a rough model. Some of them are super finished and polished, and then they can throw it over the wall to the 3D visualization team. Let them create the photoreal asset that's 100% in proportion, has the right material, is built the right way for the program. So there's a very different level of building and creating that you can do within 3D.
And so now your design reviews are happening in 3D. So like how is that? Like designers are creating these concepts in 3D. How do they present them?
Yeah, we still haven't perfected that either. So we use Mural, which is a live canvas kind of. So we drop everything in there, and there'll be 2D sketches, there'll be GIFs, there'll be 3D images. So everything's there, and we just kind of pan around the page and go through it. I think what excites all of us about Gravity Sketch is that I could be in that environment, right, with this like viewer license or on headsets and have everybody immersed in that room and spinning a model around and really showing people what it looks like. I think that's where we're super excited to get to.
Okay, yeah, because it's part of it, right? Like the entire process is so built around 2D that it's hard to break apart from it. Also, it's easier to just kind of like send over and get other people that might not necessarily have the software to be able to consume 3D content, which probably you're going through.
I think other
developers. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think other industries do a better job at it. Like I always say, like there's no way at a car company or something else that they're gonna look at a 2D sketch and say, yeah, let's go build that. That looks like a good idea, right? They're gonna have a 3D model. It's probably gonna be on a screen and it's gonna drive up and you're gonna open a door. Like it's all gonna be built out in 3D before they do anything else. And consumer electronics products, all that stuff is built out. We're getting into apparel now. We've been in apparel, but 3D visualization of apparel, we're getting into that deeper now. And the programs that are made for apparel, you can go from a sketch to a pattern to a model. They're much more built out. So I think we'll actually accelerate quicker in apparel than we were able to in footwear. Footwear is this kind of in-between space between a hard good and a soft good. And there's nothing designed specifically to do footwear. You can use Gravity Sketch, you can use Moto, you can use 10 different programs and you can create something, but it's not like made for it. So I think footwear is this unique industry where we're trying to kind of change the habits of people and how they've used to work and incorporate all this 3D. And it's definitely challenging for sure.
So changing habits, it's a big one, especially for designers that love the process. Like if you speak to other kind of like people from different backgrounds, process usually is something that people hate. When you speak with designers, process is something that we really cherish. Like this is my design process and I follow it in this way. When you start kind of like trying to push a different process, you've probably found a lot of people pushing back. How has that transition been, and how have you navigated all of this?
Yeah, there's been a lot of success. There's also been a lot of pushback. And as you start to see designers picking the tool up and you see the level of their work going from here to here, then the other designers are like, I better step up my game. Because again, it's kind of competition to put the best designs out there. Everybody has their individual projects, but people's work is being compared. And if you're able to create in 3D, you're just able to visualize what you're trying to do that much better than the next person. And something that we found is that, originally we had our 3D visualization team doing all the training, and they don't come from a footwear background. They come from 3D. So they might not have understood exactly some of the roadblocks, but what we've, in the last 2 years, some of our key designers are teaching the rest of the designers. So they'll be like, hey, I'm going to do a session on concept sketching. This is how I do it. And the designers all know that they have the same background. They used to use Illustrator. They did this. And now they're sharing, hey, this is how I'm doing it now. This is how I use the tools. And I think as you start to see more and more people pick up the tools and have success, then more people are like, oh, I can do that. And then they get on board with it. So, it just starts to catch on. And we still have a lot of work to do. We're making our way there. By no means is everybody fully up to doing 3D, but we're definitely well on our way there.
How is it like now that because when you work in 3D, sometimes people see it as the final thing, like there's like so much less left for interpretation, which is a good thing because then you can communicate better. But at the same time, sometimes as a designer, you kind of like that, lack of clarity. How's that been?
Yeah, it's funny. There's like an expectation. If you see a 3D asset, it has to be perfect. Proportion, materials, and everything. If you see an Illustrator drawing, nobody questions. It's out of proportion. It's like a sketch. So yeah, there's a different level of expectation with a 3D asset. And we're trying to get to the point where people, like I talk about concept sketching. So it's not perfect, but it's a 3D model. And again, we can turn it. You can see what the vamp looks like. You can see what the heel looks like. You can flip it over. Again, it's just such a better view than Illustrator. But I think you have to train people to look at 3D assets versus 2D assets. People who have worked in the industry know they look at an Illustrator, they know it's gonna look different, but they kind of get the idea. You have to train people to say, hey, this is a 3D asset. It's gonna look pretty close to what you're seeing here. And hopefully you can make a good decision based on what you're seeing.
And so I've heard you speak about digital assets before. And so is that like digital samples, sorry. Is that kind of like where you're headed? I mean, obviously that's what you're doing right now already, but is that kind of like the plan to like fully just go digital, or, what's the balance that you have with physical and digital?
No, so I mean, for us, you can never go fully digital because we create something that athletes wear, and you have to be able to try it on. We have to be able to wear test it, fit test it, material test, all of that. So there's a craftsmanship to what we do, right? They're handmade, right? It's not fully automated. So we have to go through that process, but there's a lot in the upfront process that we can do more digitally. So again, we do 3 rounds of design reviews. If those are in 3D, again, hopefully you're getting closer to what the real thing's going to look like, rather than being in a final design review in 2D and then sending something to a factory, waiting, I don't know, 2 months or something to get a shoe back and go, I don't like that, right? Hopefully we can do that in 3D right away. And then, there's a lot of different aspects to what we do. Sometimes we're just changing color materials on products. Sometimes we're generating a whole new product. So where we have the base product and we're just changing materials, we shouldn't need to see 3 rounds of prototypes, right? That take 2 months each round, right? If we can cut that down to 1, right? So we do a digital review and then we do 1 physical. Hopefully we can achieve that. We're trying to do that in spots. Again, there's a material and a color matching, and there's all sorts of things with manufacturing that you have to be able to do. But there's so many aspects where you can cut down on the amount of samples that you're making, the amount of rounds that you're doing, just utilizing those digital assets.
And so that's not only speeding up the process, but it's helping the world actually, just not producing so much.
Yeah, there's a big sustainability part to it. If you think about making samples, waste at a factory, the shipping, it's all air shipped into the US back to us. And then most of those samples are kind of scrapped because they're samples. So there is a sustainability part to it. It's not on this massive scale because we're just not making hundreds of thousands. But there is a portion of that's brought into the equation.
And are you also reducing the travel that you need to be doing to go to the factories and so on, or is that not the case so much?
Yeah, I think as the tools get better, right, I'll still point back to the gravity sketch and the ability to be immersed in the same environment. If I'm able to sit with a team at the factory while I'm sitting here and we're all looking at the same shoe and we're spinning it around and we're noting it and doing all that, that's to me just as good as sitting in a factory. So we're not there yet, but I think that's where we will be. Even like meetings like this or like a typical Teams meeting, it's just video. At some point, we're going to be immersed. It's going to be a VR headset, and we're all going to be sitting in the same room, and we're all in different parts of the world. So definitely go in there, and 3D assets again. It's kind of, you're going to have them, and like I talk about now, as we hire younger designers, they all come in with when I came. Illustrator, Photoshop, that was like check. We all knew how to do that. Now people know how to do Blender and Keyshot, and some are in Gravity Sketch, and they just know how to use like 8 different tools to be able to create what they want to create. And that's that next generation that's going to be, designing for all of us.
And so for someone that is looking to start something like what you started 7 years ago, like moving into 3D, moving into, like really transforming the design process in an industry that it's kind of like very old school in a way still. What are like some of the things that you would like tell them to do first, like some tips for them?
Really start with like thinking about what do you want to achieve, right? Do you want to teach your designers to be 3D artists? Do you want to bring in a team of 3D artists that just create assets and work with your designers? Do you want to reduce samples? Do you like what do you want to do with it, right? And then when you figure that out, then you can start to put a plan together. And I think what's really important is to kind of prove your concept. So really early on, I was lucky enough to meet William Vaughn, who heads up our 3D team. He was actually a teacher down at the Dave School in Orlando, and he was teaching students 3D. And we went down there because we were looking for interns. And we found our first 2 interns in 3D and brought them back. And eventually he started consulting for us and then hired. But he's been like a guru all the way through. Like he understands 3D and pipelines and all the stuff that's necessary. So with his help, we were able to build a single shoe and show people, hey, we can build 3D shoes and it has accurate materials and we can spin it around and we can do all this stuff. This is really cool. And then I was able to take that asset along with a plan to my boss and say, hey, I think we should invest in this. And I was lucky enough to have the support of the leadership team at the time. And we just kept doing more with it. We added video, we just kept doing more and more with it. And the more I shared it with the leadership team, they're like, yeah, we need to be in this digital age. And I was able to get that support. And something that I always have is kind of like a 2 or 3 year plan of where we want to go. And constantly updating the people like on our team. Our factory partners have been played a big role in this. So keeping them up to speed to say, hey, this is where we're going with this. If you invest with us, we think we can reduce samples and do this sort of thing. So having a vision, sharing it, and then if you're able to get your leadership team on board, that's super important. And then obviously, if your leadership team's on board, there's budget that comes with it and all that stuff. But that's, that I think I come back to where we started and where I said, like, I feel like I have that balance between creative and business that is able to take this like creative idea, build a business plan, and implement it. We didn't have anything 7 years ago around this, and now it's, I think, a pretty important part of what we do day to day.
So how do you like? What are some of those things that you use to convince those stakeholders, those kind of like leadership people, to jump into that train with you? Because they're probably not thinking about like, oh, you're going to be able to express a design better, and that's going to just help your team be more creative. Obviously, all of these things are important for them, but there's probably a lot of like business side of things that you needed to figure out to actually make this a compelling proposal.
Yeah, I mean, really, this again, the start of it was, hey, I want us to be able to concept sketch in 3D versus 2D because we can express our ideas better and we can make better decisions earlier in the process. It was like that simple. We partnered up with Moto, so the team from Foundry, and we paid them and worked with them to build a shoe and really start to see what it looked like. Then we worked with them on training for the design team. But I think as you have successes, right, and you share that with the team, then it's easier for the leadership team to say, okay, I get it. I think pretty early on, we were doing like 3D video rotations at a design review on a big screen. And going from looking at 2D, like I can remember back, I don't know, 10 years ago, we would have like, poster board with lateral views of designs on them all around a room on an easel. And, 50 people in a room and nobody could see what was on the board because it was too small. And then, fast forward, we show up in a room and we've got a big screen and we have a video rotation, animated, exploded views, all this cool stuff happening with 3D, and people are wowed. And I think you get that reaction and people are like, hey, we should invest in this. This is a good idea. And again, we've proved that it's more than just a design tool. It's the product marketing teams use it, the merchandising teams use it. So it's bigger. It's become bigger than just design.
And didn't it all become like too technical? When you brought in Will that had the expertise in 3D, like 3D historically has been very technical. And so you now created an entire team that is like helping on visualization and so on. Did that slow things down? Or, like, because it's quicker to just make some side views and put them in a poster than create kind of like all of these videos and exploded views and so on.
Yeah, this is like back and forth. Like, why am I doing all this work when I could just do a quick illustrated drawing and then I could make something? I still get that from people. And I don't disagree, right? That's like a quick and dirty way to mock something up. But if you get really good at 3D in an afternoon or something, you can create a pretty cool 3D asset that you can spin around on screen. So there's an argument for both. But something that we learned really early on was I didn't want designers to become 3D artists because it's just not what we pay them for, right? Like their job is to be creative and problem solve and make the next amazing running shoe or basketball shoe. And I want them working with consumers and athletes in our sports lab and all this stuff to make that next great product. I don't want them spending a week in Moto or Gravity Sketch making a photoreal asset. So that's why we brought in the 3D visualization team, because we wanted to create those assets. We just didn't want the designers going that far with what they were creating.
What is the biggest challenge that you see in the industry communication-wise? Like, how teams are communicating, how different types of people are like having conversations.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we're doing right now. It's the fact that we're not all sitting in an office across the table from one another having a conversation. I think the world and how we work, how we communicate has changed forever. And you're always going to have some aspect of it remote. You're going to have people you could be all over the world, right? Working for the same company. So how do you deal with time zones? How do you deal with, I need a physical sample. It needs to get shipped to somebody. When do I bring people into the office to have that conversation? So I think all the logistics that come with working remote will be, I think, the biggest challenge we'll all have for the next several years till it becomes like second nature. It feels like it almost has, but I don't think we've worked out all the kinks yet.
What is the best piece of design that you've seen lately? Like what's like anything that you've seen lately that you're like wowed?
I'm really into Formula One racing right now, and they brought out a new generation of car last year, and just looking at all the science and data that they use to create those cars, and the difference that you see in some of them. Like, I won't get too deep into it, but like the Mercedes car looks way different than the rest of the teams. They took off the scoop on the side, and it's just amazing to see how design and engineering come together to problem solve. And they're all about, making cars faster in seconds. But yeah, I'm kind of looking at that, and then just that's from like the performance side. But then you look at the graphics and the visuals how they paint the cars. Super cool. I think they reinvent how they look each year, and it's super interesting.
That's awesome. Are you
There's something very different.
Are you taking some inspiration from how engineering and design work together in that industry to bring it into your team?
Yeah, we are always trying to make athletes better. We have a new amazing sports research lab that just opened at our new track in Boston, and we have all these amazing tools. So we've partnered with our lab quite a bit. We've talked about kind of the science of sport, data to design. Our whole Fresh Foam line of shoes really came from taking data and bringing it into 3D tools, into a tool called Grasshopper, and helped us generate those sole units. So yeah, anytime we can bring data and science into what we do, we're making better product, we're making athletes better. So that's always been a target for us.
That's usually kind of like something like two different types of people having to work together, right? Like two different ways of thinking in a way.
Yeah. There's like the scientists and the lab engineers and those sort of people. And then how do you take that data and bring it into something that's useful? And like I said, we have a team of computational designers now that's the kind of the work that they're doing. So they're helping us take whether it's pressure data or strike patterns or heat data, and how do you like interpret that into something that's useful to create a product. So that's really interesting to see. Our innovation team's been kind of on that kick for a while now. So yeah, it's definitely next level of design. It's not just drawing a pretty picture and saying, well, that looks cool. It actually does something functionally better than the next product. And that's, it being part of a performance company, there's a lot of things that just look great, but our high-end product needs to perform better than the next. And that's what we're, working on all the time.
Yeah, 100%. That's kind of like really exciting to see where things are going in that direction, and just kind of like finding more data-driven designs, and how that kind of like combination of different ways of thinking actually ends up culminating in a really great product.
You don't always see it in the final product either, right? It's like the backstory or something like that might get out, but you don't always see it. But when we're like, that's something that we're actively thinking about and doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, you usually don't see it at all, and like usually people don't really understand what happened behind creating a product. It's I like to give the example, when you ask a child if they know where the chicken that they're eating came from, they'll say that it came from the supermarket, because they don't know everything that had to happen before. And so it's right. Sometimes with design is the same, right? Like, do you know what had to happen for those shoes that you're wearing to actually look and feel and perform that way? No, nobody knows.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Thank you so much, Jared, for your time today. We've really learned a lot from your career, from your process, from your way of thinking, and hopefully this will give a lot of inspiration to people that are looking to go into the same route in footwear or in any other industry that is producing, products and having to work with designers and people that are not necessarily designers, and how is communication actually flowing in all of those different teams.